If you've been paying attention recently, you've probably noticed that young men have been shifting right politically lately. A lot of people are surprised and confused by this, but I think the writing's been on the wall for a while now. This topic has not only been pressing recently, but also increasingly misunderstood by the modern and political cultural landscape. A lot of young men feel abandoned by the political left, and I want to give my thoughts on the situation.
It's certainly true that many young men felt more welcomed, more seen, more heard on the Republican side. And sometimes politics boils down to who likes me.
One of the biggest and most prevalent reasons I've noticed is that young men feel ostracized in left-leaning spaces. Over the past few decades, we've witnessed many changes in society, changes that have reshaped our institutions, our culture, and even our identities. One of the groups most affected by these shifts, though often overlooked, are young men. You see, in recent years, much of the political left has had a strong emphasis on issues like race, intersectionality, and gender identity. While these movements are important, some young men feel that their struggles, particularly those tied to masculinity, class, or economic hardships, are sidelined or misunderstood. This can lead to the feeling or the perception that issues are a zero-sum game. The more we focus on the struggles of other groups, the less space there is to acknowledge specific challenges that young men face. Not saying that this is the reality, but it is how it can come across. As a result, young men may perceive the left as dismissive of their experiences. For young men, there's a growing sense that their voices are being drowned out by a broader focus on other issues. This isn't to dismiss the importance of those issues, but for young men, the feeling that their pain is secondary or even invisible can create a sense of political isolation. Some people will say that this isn't the reality of what's really happening, or say that it's blown out of proportion, but if enough young men genuinely feel this way, they're going to shift at some point.
What's the narrative for men? The narrative for men, there are two of them. One of them is, don't be toxic, not a compelling narrative. And the other narrative, reclaim your glorious birthright, win everything to which you are entitled.
So if young men don't feel like their voices are being heard, naturally, they're going to go to places where they do feel heard. Social media has made it easier for people to find these communities that reflect their feelings and beliefs. These young men may see these concerns ignored or trivialized in mainstream left-wing spaces, while right-wing or alternative communities are more willing to highlight and listen to these issues. Their issues may or may not be fixed in these communities, but they do feel heard. This can, and probably will, make right-wing spaces seem more appealing. When young men spend more time in these spaces, and they like what they hear, their identity and beliefs are more likely to shift. The left, on the other hand, can seem out of touch or even dismissive when it comes to engaging with the legitimate concerns that young men have. Rather than offering solutions, there's a tendency to frame their issues in terms of privilege or entitlement, which only deepens their sense of being ignored and misunderstood. Also, on a side note, in the past, many young men found their sense of purpose and belonging through family, religion, sports, or social institutions. These were places where they could connect with other men, receive guidance, and develop a sense of responsibility. In many ways, these institutions offered a buffer from the challenges of life and a sense of belonging. Today, those traditional community structures are in decline. Religion, unions, local support groups, clubs, basically any and all third spaces are less prevalent than they were in the past. This loss of community leaves many young men searching for a sense of belonging, often online. Not necessarily in political spaces, but more isolated and alone.
This is not Joe Biden's fault. It's not Kamala Harris's fault. It's not Barack Obama's fault. It is the fault of the Democratic Party in not knowing how to communicate effectively to voters.
So what now? What's the way forward? It's clear that the left needs to reevaluate how it addresses these issues faced by young men. This doesn't mean we have to go back to the 1950s, but expand the conversation to include the struggles of young men in a way that's nuanced, compassionate, and solution-oriented. These men don't feel represented by the left. They don't feel seen or heard. The reason I'm focusing on so much on how young men feel is because if you don't know their struggles or how they perceive the world or how they genuinely feel in the political landscape, we're going to keep missing the mark and keep getting results like this. Some of these right-wing or alternative spaces are the only place that they feel like their voice and their issues matter. You can debate on how real you think these issues are, but they're real enough that young men are looking for answers, and those are the only places that they're getting them from. But what do you think? Did I miss anything? Let me know about it and your experiences down below. I really want to try and uplift young men on this channel, so if that's something you're interested in, stick around. And with that said, my name's Kale, and I hope you all make the most out of every moment that lies ahead.